That's an interesting comment that the Investment Management Association believes that the U.S., and I would understand that to mean the Dodd-Frank regulatory reforms being introduced by the U.S. regulators such as the Securities Exchange Commission and CFTC, Commodities Futures Trading Commission, have become more extraterritorial. I really think you have to break that into really two aspects. One is what in particular are happening to foreign asset managers, and then second, what in particular will happen to foreign asset managers if they're trying to do transactions with U.S. counterparties. Actually, when Dodd-Frank was introduced and then the following rules for foreign asset managers, I actually thought it was much more favorable than we originally anticipated. When the initial versions of Dodd-Frank were coming out, it looked to me, and I would say most of the U.S. Lawyers and the markets, that all investment managers outside of the U.S. would have to be registered, even if they were just doing a minute amount of activity with either U.S. counterparties or U.S. investors, or if they were setting up U.S. hedge funds. But actually, the way Dodd-Frank was finalized and the SEC's rules were written, there's actually a lot of exemptive relief for foreign managers. Originally, it looked like you would be required to be registered if you had 25 million in either clients or U.S. investors, so U.S. investors or U.S. clients, and more than 14 U.S. investors or clients. So it would be very easy to trigger having one investor that might have 26 million from the United States. So it looked like you'd have to register. And that was if you fell within 25 and within 14 or less U.S. counterparties or investors, then that was a foreign private advisor exemption. And there was also the private fund advisor exemption, but that looked like it would only be applicable to U.S. managers. But actually, the final rules, it's applicable to non-U.S. managers. And so provided a non-U.S. asset manager has no place of business in the United States, and technically, they would not have to register because they could rely on this exemptive relief, even if they had U.S. investors in their portfolio. Because in order to remain outside, provided they don't have any place of business in the United States, they should be able to have exemptive relief. The one negative about that is that because they will be what's known as a exempt reporting advisor, they will have certain paperwork and reports that they will have to submit to the SEC. But it's not the full-fledged being registered, which was pretty much what the market anticipated. So in that sense, I think asset managers should take some comfort that there was kind of a broad recognition that the SEC didn't need to have actual registration of non-U.S. managers, which I think contrasts actually with what's under the Alternative Investment Management Directive over here, where U.S. managers transacting with non-U.S. counterparties most likely will be subject to registration. Now, where I do think Dodd-Frank is going to have a big impact on non-U.S. managers and their funds is, say, in things such as if they're going to be trading in OTC derivatives activity. Because what's going to happen is most likely they will be trading with U.S. counterparties. So that's going to hit them on the one side because the U.S. counterparties are going to be very regulated in their derivatives activity. So they will have to comply with whatever their U.S. Counterparties are being forced to comply with. The other aspect of this is if they do sufficient amount of activity with the U.S. counterparties, the funds themselves could become subject to registration as major swap participants. So in that sense, there is a lot of potential ways that Dodd-Frank is becoming very extraterritorial. And then in addition to that, we were thinking about the Volcker rule earlier. That's going to restrict a lot of what their counterparties are going to be able to transact in because they're not going to be able to do any form of proprietary trading. And in addition to that, that's also going to affect perhaps if it's a fund that's being set up by a bank, how much that bank, if it's caught by the Volcker rule, is going to be able to participate in the structuring and the investment in that fund. So it is a very broad question and a very broad overstatement to say that Dodd-Frank has these huge negative extraterritorial effects because Dodd-Frank covers a huge panoply of different aspects of regulation for financial institutions. So on the one hand, I actually think, as I said, there was very good news in terms of the registration, although there will be significant reporting requirements for non-US asset managers. But on the negative, there are going to be all these other ripple effects, and that will come through their OTC derivatives activity and perhaps their sponsorship by various banking entities under the Volcker rule.